is one of the important attributes of Indian society, not of middle class. I can raise this voice on the basis of one reason, that if 78% or 79% of Indian population, on the basis of various reports given by the members of Planning Commission, if their expenditure is around 20 rupees a day, then how can you say that 30% people of Indian society constitute middle class? It is not possible. Either the data which has been provided by the members of the Planning Commission, it is not based upon facts, or something is missing in terms of defining middle class. The same argument which is given by Professor Vijay Shankar Vyas here is based upon, or rather is very close to what Dipankar argued in Social Revolution from Above. He is also making the same argument, that revolutions can take place in any society on the basis of middle class, on the basis of intelligentsia, on the basis of the peoples relating to different professions. But yes, on one point, we can have agreement with Professor Vijay Shankar Vyas. Rising middle class is not the reality, but aspirations, or rather mindset of the middle class is the reality of Indian society. Whether you belong to the lower class or you belong to other sections of society, the market forces have created middle class aspirational structures. If you go and talk to a person in the market, he will never say that he belongs to or she belongs to middle class or lower class. They will always be making this argument that yes, we belong to middle class. And what is the meaning of middle class? A mobile, which everybody is having now. You can have mobile from one company which is very important. It constitutes a brand, but a rickshaw puller is also having a mobile, of course, with cheap value. So market has approached everywhere, and that market is hierarchy linked, but definitely market has created middle class aspirations. The second component related to Indian society, contemporary Indian society, is a big number of working class operating with unorganized sector. Nearly 91 to 92%. 92% people belonging to working class are now associated with unorganized sector, and it's a big number. We are not paying much attention as far as the people relating to unorganized sector working class is concerned. Not paying any attention. And it is most apathetic situation of Indian society. All important rules I was discussing in a very symbolic way to my students here also, that you will find drastic changes in the field of laws relating to working class on the name of industrial reforms, and rules relating to peasantry or the farmers or the landless agriculturists. Drastic changes have taken place. Trade union movement is completely disintegrated because of the labor reforms. Because of the labor reforms. We do not know what kind of changes central government and the state government has introduced in the field of labor reforms. Sir, now people in Rajasthan, industrial unit having more than 400 people, they can only constitute trade unions. People or industries having the working class up to 400, they cannot constitute trade unions. Hire and fire rules has been imposed upon. No rule can be introduced in special economic zones. It means more and more people are becoming the part of the unorganized sector. More and more people. Feminization of labor is there, yes. In the field of agriculture, it is again unorganized. Or if you go and examine the situations of the working women in call centers or other kind of organizations related to service sectors, you will find the presence of the unorganized sector. Interests are not protected. Rather, interests are not protected at all. In the field of education, para-teachers, part-time teachers, or even persons like guest faculty, or teachers who have been employed on fixed salary, don't you consider they constitute unorganized working class? The interests, the social security related to these sections of society does not exist. So more and more unorganized sector of working class. It is another attribute of Indian society, contemporary Indian society. And the third, he was talking about a moral attitude of Indian society. Yes, a moral attitude is right up to a certain extent. But for me, the formation of the rightist forces in Indian polity is the most important change which has taken place. It's a paradigmic shift, a new form of government in India. You may agree or disagree on this issue, but it's a shift. For the first time, a complete government which claims that they support rightist ideology has taken over. Now, what will happen with the formation of this government? I have seen some of the important factors, and they in fact stimulate me to construct the character of the state now. Without the active assistance of democratic institutions, now decisions are there. Suddenly we find that the height of a dam is increased without inviting the meeting of the chief ministers. This is one. Second, certain changes to disintegrate planning commission without having any discussion in ministry. And third, they are now encouraging civil servants, researchers, scientists to teach students. Means decline as far as the formal rules of the teaching community is concerned. This is probably less government, minimum government and maximum governance. So teach the students about maximum governance. Who will teach? The administrators. What will happen to skill development? Teachers will not taught. It will be discussed by the researchers, by the scientists. If these things go on, then exclusion of different nature will come into existence. That kind of exclusion can be interpreted in several ways. Now, one kind of exclusion will be there in terms of our culture versus their culture. This is the most important kind of exclusion which is now coming up. When Amrit Sen was talking about argumentative Indian and he explained the notion of Indian identity, he was having this view that Indian identity means a culture based upon federalism. Federal identity of each and every Indian. Now this federal identity is under the process of collapse. You will find a clear-cut distinction between our culture versus their culture. It is an exclusivity view of identity. It is not an inclusion-based view of Indian identity. It's a cultural threat as far as Indian society is concerned. If cultural exclusion takes place, then probably we will be creating that kind of segmentization which will lead to social division at any stage. The debate between our culture and their culture is nothing but the debate of polarization. And that polarization is logically established on the basis of several factors. You all use social media. Just examine the messages which you are receiving. As if this country belongs to us only. Others are not allowed to reside, or if you want to reside in this country, reside on the basis of those terms and conditions which we are dictating. It is the most important form of exclusion which is coming up. The second kind of exclusion, I was reading an article day before yesterday, and in that article one of the scholars has mentioned a concept related to higher education. He has used the term excellent sheets. What our education system is doing. Earlier, when we were studying, the category of sheeps was produced. We belong to that category. And now, higher education is producing excellent sheeps on the name of quality education. This is second kind of exclusion. A particular category, who is an excellent sheep? A person who is competent in the field of management, who is competent in the field of negotiation, who is competent in the field of providing goods at every cost. If you are successful in doing this, then you will be constituting that category. So this is an exclusion. What will happen? Students like us, who were associated with the rural world, associated with the working class, associated with landless agriculturists, associated with lower caste, associated with Adivasis, associated with the category of women, they will be out. Because of the nature of quality education provided by so-called elite institutions does not belong to us. So we will be out from the category of the excellent sheeps. It means you will be forcing us to act as a cheap labor. Again, the same category of working class discussed by Marx. So we will be acting as a cheap labor force, cheap workforce, and that cheap workforce will generating surplus for them, the ruling class. And that surplus labor will become useful as far as market forces is concerned. So market will get more and more strength, and this particular category will be used for corporate world. I am reminded with one of the important statements. That's why I am using this term of social exclusion and inclusive are unnecessary for me. In Holy Family, Marx wrote a statement, and I am requesting you to please go through this statement very carefully. The humiliation of the female sex is an essential feature of civilization as well as barbarism. The only difference is that civilized system raises, we are a part of civilized system. Civilized system raises to a compound, equivocal, ambiguous, hypocritical mode of existence of every vice that barbarity practices. In the simple form, nobody is punished more for keeping women a slave than man himself. The same argument is now here. Same argument. the feminization of the workforce, the role of women or the treatment of female members in family, the treatment given to by urban world to women related to rural world, or urban men by urban men to urban women. That kind of barbaric attitude still prevails, but it is in a civilized way. Now barbaric patriarchy is now replaced by neoliberal patriarchy. That kind of exclusion is also there. So my argument is the persons who are powerful. I have again reminded with a very important book, What Happens When Ruling Class Rules. No change has taken place. The ruling class of different kinds, they are creating those trends and tendencies with formal institutional structures so that exclusion becomes a reality. And by creating this exclusion, they want to say that this is your real place. Do not try to come close to ruling class. But for making democratic order intact, for making neoliberal democratic order intact, they will say, yes, inclusive development is a necessity. सबका विकास होना चाहिए. सबका विकास दोस्तों सबके साथ होने वाली बात बड़ा एक एब्स्ट्रैक्शन है. It will, ruling class will never allow to play such kind of developmental model. So exclusion has become a reality, and inclusive development is nothing but a part of exhibition of democracy. We want to live in a democratic order, so we exhibit that inclusive growth, inclusive model of development should be here, but the reality is that this political class, this ruling class is deeply interested in creating fragmentation so that they could control over the market forces, they could act as market forces and create market society and the consumer society. So if you want to have any inclusive model of development, if you want to introduce any potential threat to the process of exclusion, then there is a need to attack on that aspect of market society and consumer society which is coming up with the help of these neoliberal forces. Thank you.
Points, and I hope other speakers also will address these issues. Now shall I invite the oral speakers, Dr. Nisha Yadav.
Namaskar. There are three issues that I wish to highlight in my presentation. First, that inclusive development is a component of modernization exercise that aspires to transform the tradition-based world of the third. That so-called Indian miracle has generated new kinds of schisms, essentially related to income and social divides, which is a prerequisite for the project of inclusive development. And thirdly, that how the idea of inclusive development forces a reconceptualization of the Indian state, its policies and its programs. I would like to give a brief background of the Indian economic scenario before taking up the above issues. Post-independence, India followed a path of mixed economy, wherein there was a centralized allocation of resources leading to state-directed control of market economy. However, the era of liberalization policies led to the decontrol of market economy in the 1990s, truncating the role of the state. The initial emphasis on growth demoted the objective of even distribution, and hence the benefits of economic growth were soon found to be accompanied by exclusions, as Sir just mentioned, rising income inequalities and social inequities. This inaugurated the framing of the concept of inclusive development. It is at this juncture that a distinction between the third world and the world of the third needs to be made. It becomes important. The third world is represented by the word lack. That is, it lacks the attributes of the first and the second worlds. Whereas the world of the third emanates from the structure of language, logic, experience, ethos that cannot be reduced to modernism, capitalism. The world of the third is therefore the foreclosed world constituted outside the first and the third worlds, whereas the third world is produced from the perspective of the first world. This difference becomes the basis to explain the logic of exclusion through inclusion. With this theoretical construction of the world of the third, I would like to bring to light issues related to the neoliberal economy in India. The liberalization policies in India gave the impression of shining India in the first few years. However, it was increasingly felt that only a few section of population was actually shining. That is, the rich and the middle class, particularly in the urban areas, corporate sectors and IT sectors. Rural India and social sector did not benefit from liberalization. In fact, the market-centered economic reforms have widened the rich-poor and urban-rural economic disparities. A commission appointed by the Honorable Prime Minister in 2011 reported that 77%, that is 836 million of the people in India are living in less than 20 rupees a day, which Sir just mentioned. Adjusted to the purchasing power parity, this tallies with United Nations Human Development Report that estimated that 75.6% of Indians live on less than $2 a day. A similar analysis made by the eminent economist Mr. Prabhat Patnaik demonstrates that the current developmental discourse, despite the burgeoning economy, has contributed to the increased poverty in rural India. Comparing the growing poverty with the parameter of 2,400 calories or less per person in rural India and 2,100 calories or less in urban India as poor, he holds that the measurement of calorie intake shows that 74.5% of the rural population was poor in 1993-94, which increased to 87% in 2004-2005. Similarly, the corresponding figure was 57% and 64% respectively in urban India. It can thus be concluded that the self-propelling logic of competitive market economy faltered as a poverty reduction strategy. It is now increasingly being felt that liberalization policies have failed in rendering equity or equality. There is therefore a need for purposive action by the local, state and central governments. They should have an equal role vis-a-vis the market, facilitating trade, exchange and enterprise. Further, it needs to be more proactive with policy interventions. The Gandhian economic vision can be used as an effective remedy to meet the challenges of the globalized economy and promote social inclusion. Thank you.
Today I will be speaking to all of you from the Faculty of English, and the paper that I am presenting is titled The Representative from Rooster Coop, a class-based exploration of Arvind Adiga's The White Tiger. Please understand, Your Excellency, that India is two countries in one, an India of light and an India of darkness. The ocean brings light to my country, but the river brings darkness to India, the Black River. Arvind Adiga became a household name with the publication of his debut and Man Booker Prize winning epistolary novel, The White Tiger. This novel acted as a mirror to show the true reality behind India's success story, where the dark India of class and caste discrimination, poverty, illiteracy, crime and unemployment struggle for survival just beneath the glittering brightness of light India's economic growth trajectory. Adiga's The White Tiger is a social commentary on how the policy of globalization and modernization ushered in a reign of such socio-economic disparity that widened the gulf between the rich and the poor, thereby leading to the simultaneous coexistence of two separate Indias, the light India of the rich people who enforced the marginalization of the others and the dark India of poor deprived people. The novel proceeds as a 7-part letter addressed to the Chinese premier Wen Jiabu from Balram, a self-taught entrepreneur. The novel, in a voice loaded with wit and sarcasm, narrates the journey of this Balram Halwai, who rises from the quagmire of the darkness and transforms himself into the white tiger, the creature that comes along only once in our generation. By making use of the zoo analogy, Adiga brings to fore the ancient nexus of class and caste-based discrimination, which, even though outlawed by the Indian constitution, still perpetuates utterly inhuman class-based exclusions. Adiga's anti-hero explains how prior to India's independence, all people like zoo animals had their designated places in the society. But post-independence, the national leaders, in their attempt to liberate the oppressed, opened the doors of these cages. However, what replaced the zoo law turned out to be a jungle raj, where it was the case of survival of the fittest, or what Balram calls the hunger of the belly. This nexus further shatters the underprivileged people who, in their fight to climb the social ladder, are even denied certain basic freedom, for instance, freedom to choose their profession, which is different from their assigned caste or class. What the reader very soon realizes is that various attempts by the government to mainstream these socio-economically deprived people through legislation comes to naught, as the intrinsic system holds back the poor not only at the economic level but even at the administrative and the civic level. All social institutions like the state and the church help in perpetuating the class-based segregation. The poor man is consigned to the vicious cycle of poverty, where he barely manages to make both ends meet and therefore is unable to look beyond satisfying his basic needs. In such a scenario, the people in power and authority, instead of helping the lower class, end up exploiting them. So the lower class people exchange one master with another one. In the novel, Adiga provides us with numerous instances where Balram and his friends are exploited. Case in point being how the 4 corrupt zamindars monopolize all the resources of the village Lakshmangarh. How Balram's own father, who did back-breaking work of a rickshaw puller, earned only a handful of coins. Adiga makes the readers realize how even democracy, that was to provide every citizen of our country a say in its government, has failed the people of darkness by enabling only the rich to become powerful politicians and stamping out any representative voice from the lower classes. The power of Adiga's pen lies in his ability to leave an indelible impression on the reader's mind by revealing one of the causes responsible for the suppression of these marginalized classes via the phenomena that he calls the rooster coup, which traps the Indian underclass in an everlasting state of servitude. It involves both premeditated methods exploited by the upper class and a mindset imposed by the underclass on itself. The author seems to be suggesting that for a level playing field, the education system should play a pivotal role. However, the protagonist describes the pathetic state of education in his village, which, instead of providing them the enabling skills, is only churning out ill-equipped and illiterate workforce. Balram describes how his school's corrupt teacher does nothing to impart any knowledge but indulges into money-making by selling their lunch money. Adiga seems to be suggesting the need for more entrepreneurs in the society who possess big hunger in their bellies to be someone different and better than what society expects them to be. The novel then proposes that the only way forward for the underclass to fight against such a skewed economic system is to grab their rights through a revolution, as the novel doesn't repose much faith in the given dispensation. At the end, the reader is compelled to contemplate on the maladies of existing social system and the way forward. Unless mindsets of the social conditions of the people of darkness are addressed, there is no chance that India can hope for an inclusive society. The underclass deserve their freedom from the bondages of the present social and class culture so as to allow them to break away from their rooster coup. There are already several isolated examples where the low-class people have pushed the envelope by breaking the barriers. However, once this movement assumes critical mass, it will usher an era of inclusive society. Thank you.
Good morning all. I am also from the Department of English and I have taken up the dance drama by Tagore, Chandalika. My paper title reads Tagore's Chandalika, a tryst with untouchability and gender discrimination. The representation of lower and underprivileged sections of society by several progressive writers of the 20th century like Premchand, Tagore, Ismat Chugtai, Mulkraj Anand, etc. has been helpful in forging significant changes on the social front, in the sense that they question the existing social ethos and the political system. Tagore's dance drama Chandalika is the literary representation of the controversial subject of untouchability, where he questions the stagnant power structures which construct the high and low caste, culminating in the spiritual rebirth of Prakriti, the untouchable girl, who is bound by the fetters of her Chandal origin. The play can be said to be a dramatic expression of his own ideology of finding divinity in man. A female subaltern, Prakriti offers stiff resistance to the inequitable discourse of untouchability. She flouts all normative constructs posed by the Hindu religion. Her mother Maya's constant warnings and reminders to her regarding her Chandal origin force her to contradict this discourse of untouchability and subalternity. From ancient times, the elite classes have successfully manipulated them and have perpetuated the discourse that Chandal is an inferior, mean, untouchable race, hence they would continue with the biases in contemporary Indian society, culture and religion. This dance drama also foregrounds the theme of female desire, a taboo then and even now in Bengali literature. Through the dance drama Chandalika, Tagore tried to dispel the social taboos attached to dancing and to make it socially acceptable. Indian dance, once a revered art form, had fallen into disrepute under the British colonial rule, so much that the educated elites considered it as gross and profane. It was considered fit only for prostitutes and the rustic village folks. In his essay Nari in 1936, Tagore urged women to step out of the precincts of their home to pursue education and cultivate the intellect, stressing the importance of the autonomous self-development. These women who dance in his experimental dance dramas in 1930s Bengal, as opposed to being limited to the home and the hearth, offered impure, non-classical yet powerful alternatives of being modern Indian women. Such representation of women showed his feminist orientation in the politics of women's emancipation and can be used to initiate a discourse of selfhood and feminism. For Prakriti, the female protagonist, the fluidity of dance movement is an expression of her emotional, physical and spiritual desires. It is through dance that she gains freedom from the constricting binaries of pure, impure, body, soul, ethical, unethical, self, other that bind her. Prakriti is a fractured self who is denied legitimacy due to her caste and class, facing the socio-cultural impositions on her selfhood, so much so that even her desires have to be ratified within the class structures and the class constructs. The actual understanding of her own self takes place through different forms of rebellion against the social and sexual codes. Though she internalizes the stigma attached to her caste and class which have victimized her, yet her inner questionings show her inner consciousness as a human being, thereby foregrounding agency and power which remain a latent power till Ananda, the Buddhist monk, ignites the passion and selfhood in her. Ananda, the monk's request for water from Prakriti, an untouchable, makes her for the first time realize what it is to be an equal. With this awakening of equality comes her awareness of her as a woman with desires which turn into a compulsive yearning for the man who taught her to respect her own self. Through the mere act of giving water to a monk, she seems to have satiated her thirst for self-respect. She considered it as a kind of self-ablution which cleansed her of the stigma of being an outcast. To receive both food and water from an untouchable was considered sacrilegious, and it is through the universal image of water that Tagore seeks to intermingle the ideological revolution reflected in the social, political and religious scene of our times. Tagore's introduction of the psychological revolt against caste suppression lends a whole new meaning to the debate. S.R. Sharma, in The Life and Works of Rabindranath Tagore, wrote, "Against the abomination of untouchability, he of course wrote his moving play Chandalika. Since that abomination continues with us, in fact assuming formidable proportions, not so infrequently, the play acquires a new relevance even today. Undoubtedly, the Hindu concept of caste distinction based on one's birth is absolutely inhuman. The order of the day, rather the need of the hour, is equality underlined with humanity. In the words of K.R. Kriplani, a new consciousness after ages of suppression is an overpowering one, and one learns restraints only after suffering." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra, for drawing attention to yet another form of exclusion. Shall I invite Ms. Risha Kalra? Will you please confine to 5 minutes? As I have been asked by...
I am another person from the Faculty of English in a row. The topic of my paper is Women as a Victim of Social Exclusion. Just the two letters W-O before man are enough to turn her life upside down. Unfortunately, not in a positive manner. Looking at the world scenario today, times have certainly changed and the opportunities have crossed borders. But the true sense of inclusion in the society is still questionable for women. Confined to the four walls of home, she is excluded from the societal mainstream, not yet free to follow her dreams. Be it any part of the globe, a woman is sadly synonymous to the terms weaker sex, downtrodden, and strive hard to equate to the man's position. Nevertheless, the chauvinist society continues to treat her as a docile, weak object, thereby judging her on the scales of purity till marriage. Through this paper, I will touch upon those factors which hinder the development of women, adding them to the socially excluded group. I would like to quote a brilliant line from The Second Sex, written by Simone de Beauvoir, before I begin. It goes like, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." It's not only the feminist concerns. A woman, during the course of her life, faces several distinctive exclusions with no logical reasons. For instance, on the health front, how many women actually take care of their bodies? They do recheck the cholesterol and sugar level for the people around, but when it comes to them, things go unnoticed. According to the report by UNICEF in 2009, the maternal mortality report of India stood at 301 per thousand, with as many as 78,000 women dying of childbirth complications in the same year. Even after the declaration by the UN about access to water and sanitation as human rights, it is estimated that 2.6 billion people live without proper sanitation and 1.1 billion practice open defecation. Not only do women have different physical needs from men, but they also have greater need for privacy when using toilets and when bathing, and the inaccessibility makes them more vulnerable to rape and other forms of gender-based violence. The well-known newspaper Times of India reported that it's easier to find a cell phone coverage in the most backward villages in India than a proper toilet. Now, if we look at the level of dowry deaths, female feticide, murder and rape cases, kidnapping and abduction, and immoral trafficking of women in India, the sanitation scenario would appear somewhat better. As per the statistics, the All India dowry death number averages around 8,000 a year, which means one innocent woman is killed every 4 hours. A decision as major as living in death is taken by someone else on her part. Suman Nalva, Additional Deputy Commissioner of Delhi Police, said, I quote, Higher socio-economic strata are equally involved in such practices. Even the highly educated class of a society does not say no to dowry. It runs deep into our social system, unquote. The level of female feticide is transparent with the poor sex ratio when the major state statistics of the country shows an average lack of 20 females in comparison to the males. This malpractice is common in some part of the India despite the passage of Parental Diagnostic Techniques Act in 1994. For the rape cases, India figured third among the top 10 countries, where the highest number of rapes has taken place in 2010, while in the cases of murder, the country comes close second in 2012. The situation of education and employment sector is equally pitiful. New data analysis from the census shows only half as many urban women work as their rural counterparts. Among the BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, which are comparable emerging economies, India has the lowest female participation rate, with only 29% of the women over the age of 15 as working. Preet Rastogi, Joint Director of Institute of Human Development in India, said, I quote, "To a certain extent, men control women's life, and women have internalized this as the norm. In such situations, the little work they do is a result of compulsion, such as when the household income is not enough rather than choice." However, there was a positive growth in this sector when about 1.5 million urban women were included in the last decade, which is more than 1 in 10 jobs created for women that time. But sadly, the few areas that show the maximum growth fell in the category of informal work, and under India's labour laws, these workers had less workplace rights. This made it harder for women to have sustainable jobs, let alone a career. The horrifying cases of kidnapping and abduction and immoral or human trafficking are just as outrageous. Among the top ones, Tamil Nadu among the southern states and New Delhi among the northern states are reported giving a tough competition to Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. India is a conglomerate of diverse ethnic, linguistic and geographical features, and its myths describe the country as Mother India, portraying it as a woman who serves as the mother to every Indian. Such a woman looks after every child's need, but in general she is disregarded herself owing to its patriarchal society. From personal to professional, household to economical, social to political, women are considered inferior and blindly excluded from the societal mainstream. With this arises another haunting question. Do we also share the brain? It is not just about criticizing others on their behavior towards the concept of inclusion of women, but to introspect in the findings of how much we ourselves are involved in degrading the situation. As a girl grows up to become a woman, she is taught to take up light jobs, jobs that would let her devote time to her family, nothing that may infuse the feeling of being included. And that's how she is blamed for being raped. When she tries to be a free-spirited, she gets a traditional "you were ought to face this" as an answer, that too from the country's political leaders and self-acclaimed gods, as the latter always seem to fall under the category of included. And when the nation burns in the fire of rage against rapes, molestation, sexual abuse, violent attacks, and when some women stand to protest for their rights, they are rather called dented and painted. It is always her fault, as we assume that she was the one inviting such crimes to happen. Though a few organizations, NGOs, national programs, funds, campaigns are striving to put in noticeable efforts, there is a substantially long way to go to bridge the wide gap of women inclusion in the Indian society. To conclude, along with the government, we as individuals have to bring about a revolutionary change in our mindset as well. As long as we keep blaming each other, the day is not far when the words amendment and solution will hold no solid ground. What we can hope for is a gradual improvement in the aforementioned situation. It is a must to protect women's chastity, modesty and solemnity and ensure her dignified position in the society. examples of Goddess Durga and Goddess Kali were a symbol of fearlessness and worshipped for their bravery. It twinges my heart to say that the entire hubbub of worshipping, respecting and including women fades away in a jiffy when one unveils the harsh reality. A quote by Swami Vivekananda supporting the above argument: "Countries and nations which do not respect women have never become great, nor will ever be in future." Thank you.
Good afternoon. Due to the constraint of time, I will try to summarize what I want to say, and I will just raise the questions which sometimes come in my mind regarding inclusion, the concept of inclusion and exclusion. The social scientists and policy makers, they have now begun to recognize the linkage between the social exclusion. But I want to talk something about the unfavorable exclusion or the unfavorable inclusion. Unfavorable inclusion in terms of the inclusion or access with the differential treatment and the high deprivation and poverty of the social groups which have suffered from the social exclusion and discrimination of various types through the ages. It is also recognized that the unfair exclusion or the unfair inclusion with the differential treatment results in the low access in income earning assets, employment, as well as the certain social needs like education, health services, food and housing. It also leads to the unequal access to the civil, religious and cultural rights, political rights and unequal participation in the governance. While in the social science, we have already discussed many things about the social exclusion, the concept of the social exclusion, so I will not discuss it here. I will just quote of the Amrit Sen, who has drawn our attention towards the new concept of the social exclusion in terms of the unfavorable exclusion and unfavorable inclusion. Unfavorable inclusion is in terms of the unequal treatment. It has also the same adverse effects as the concept of the exclusion has. The unfavorable inclusion, it also leads to high poverty and the low human development. Now first I will talk about the economic discrimination. Economic discrimination in terms of the market and non-market. In the market concept, the market exclusion, it will include the labor market and market both for the agricultural and the non-agricultural use, certain credit markets, input markets, market and services necessary for business and so on. The non-market transaction, it also includes the several public goods offered by the government and public institutions. It includes the social needs and the basic needs such as education, housing, health services, public roads, electricity, drinking water, fair price shops in consumer goods, common property resources in the rural areas like irrigation, grazing lands, forests, and various schemes and programs operated by the government and other agencies on the behalf of the government. The labor market discrimination, it can be taught in terms of the complete exclusion or the denial of the discriminated social forms from employment, that is the employment discrimination, and if we talk of the inclusion, then in terms of the selective inclusion or the differential inclusion, that is with the unequal treatment reflected in the form of the lower wage unrelated to the productivity, that is the wage discrimination, selective inclusion with unequal hiring terms and conditions with respect to the hours of work and other terms, differential behaviors towards the low caste employees in the workplaces, compulsory or forced work associated with the traditional caste obligations. When we talk about the non-market discrimination, then the restrictions they are practiced in the supply of these services which are offered through the non-market channels, particularly by the government and the other public bodies such as the educational institutions, public housing, drinking water, health services. First of all, I want to talk something about the access to the water. If we go in the remote rural areas, then nowadays also the low caste children, they have to experience a certain back foot regarding the access to the water, like they have to stand at a distance when the general caste children, they come to drink the water, then they are required to wash that before drinking, to deliberately communicate to the later that they are polluted and inferior status. Then in the case of the participation in the classroom relationship, They are not allowed to sit with the other children. They are sometimes even forced to sweep the floors and to sweep the toilets. Then if we talk about the healthcare sectors, then also this discrimination is seen. Well, the inclusion is there, but it is also in the form of a differential treatment. In the public sector, private sector and the non-profit organization, the government healthcare system in rural areas, it is responsible for providing services to all without any discrimination. But despite the provision of the equal access to all, it is likely that the low caste, they suffer from the unequal access to the health services supplied by the various providers, including the public health institutions in the rural areas, especially in the remote areas. The concept of the social exclusion, it involved either a complete exclusion from the access to the some health services, or access is there, inclusion is there, but with the differential treatment in the delivery of some services. I will give some examples. Like the discrimination it is regarding the doctors and the supporting staff, and if they visit home during the visit by the health worker, discrimination is likely to be practiced during the diagnosis and counseling, dispensing of the medicines, and even while waiting at the health centers and paying the user fee. The discrimination is during the diagnosis. It takes in the form of the time spent in asking about the problem, or may be manifested in touching the user during the diagnosis. Discrimination is during dispensing the medicine, and it is practiced in the way the medicine is given to the user. It is kept on the palm, or it is kept on the window, or which is quite humiliating, and when someone else is asked to give the medicine to the untouchable customer to avoid the physical touch. Now, I want to ask certain questions. I think that it is not real development, and when we talk of the democracy, that we are living in a democratic society, government is making many plans and has in the past also made many plans for the caste inclusion. It is in the form of the positive discrimination as well, in the form of the reservation, taking into consideration the concept of equity. But the question arises many times in my mind, that are the fruits of this positive discrimination, it is reaching to the people who really are in need of it, or it is only confined to the creamy layer. And the questions also sometimes arises when I experience certain things around in the society, that this creamy layer, it deliberately wants that the caste inequality, it should persist, so that they can enjoy the fruits of the development. So I want to say that now it's a high time that it should be objectively analyzed, that who really needs this positive discrimination, and then only we can in reality talk about the concept of development, equity, equality, caste inclusion and caste exclusion. Only including caste in the census data is not real caste inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you for raising so many questions.
Alright, a very good afternoon to the ladies and a very few gentlemen I can see in this room. Okay, so the title of my paper is, actually I am here to break the chain of the English department. I am from Law Department, I am from Amity Law School, Noida. My name is Nilesh Kumar. I along with my co-presenter Mr. Arvind Dobhal are going to present a paper on, as you can see, it's challenges for her condition of Indian women in 21st century. Okay, so let me first describe what all paper talks about. Change the slide. Yeah, the contents are what the paper is all about, the methodology, introduction, the negative side of the society, findings in history, attack on women, role of government in women empowerment, the 5-year plan, and everything has been mentioned in my paper. I've tried to confine it as much as I can, though it went a bit broader. Okay, next slide please. Yeah, the paper, what all paper talks about. Firstly, the paper reflects all the the paper reflects the overall development of women in the present situation, and this is taken in the light of the circumstances before and after the independence. This is the main focus of the paper as to in ancient India, and after that when we talk about modern India, what are the changes which have been brought in India regarding women. The second is the paper focuses on the challenging issues related to the women in India by providing case laws, precedents and substantial facts. The conclusion part provides new strategies and measures to be contemplated. Well, the strategies which I have suggested is nothing new, but at some point of time I think that if they are implemented in an effective manner, then better things can be seen in the near future. Next slide please. Methodology. Okay, the data compiled here, it consists of 136 randomly selected women from different parts of the society, and the citation which I have used in the paper itself, I have not mentioned in the PowerPoint, but in the paper which I have mentioned is the scholar form of citation. The research is in a doctrinal form of research. Somewhere the research have been, it has been deviated towards the empirical research. Next slide, please. Alright, the explanatory and descriptive form of studies have been taken in consideration. The findings move parallel with the descriptive and explanatory form of research studies, and in conclusion, part suggestions have been derived from the entire research work. Yeah. Alright, and there are a lot of ladies I can see, empowered ladies of Indian society. I would like to mention that when we see towards the society and in the context of women, there are two sides which we can see. There is one side where you find there is a lady who is the President of India, who is the Prime Minister of India, who is the Speaker of Lok Sabha, who is the leader of the opposition in Lok Sabha, who is the Deputy Leader of the opposition in Rajya Sabha, who is the Mayor, who is the Chief Minister, who is the President of the national political parties. This is a side which suggests that actually the women has been empowered after independence. But this is something which we talk about consists of very few women actually in the society. When we talk about the negative side, the negative side when we see, and especially when we go to the rural area, we find that still there are a lot of women, there are a lot of children who are unwanted and they are killed there in the womb themselves so that they don't have a chance to take birth, because of which the birth rate of girl child is lesser than the boys. Next slide please. Okay, this is the, here I have researched on in history, and the context has been taken from the Indian perspective and Western perspective. In Indian I have compiled Patanjali, Katyayana and Rig Veda, and the other one is, just a second. Yeah. And Manusmriti, whereas Western perspective talks about the code of Hammurabi and Hebraic code. We have been very aware of the fact that West has been very liberal when we talk about women. But when we see the entire slide, what we find is that no, actually even in Western countries also, women were not that that much free in the ancient times. Like when we talk about very ancient, then you can see that women were educated in the early Vedic period. This has been derived from the Rig Veda, Patanjali and Katyayana. All of them suggest that at some point of time, women were educated. Whereas when we talk about the Manusmriti, as the time changed, the Veda of the Brahmanical revival, from there the women has been started to be born into the chains. Like Shiva said that in her childhood she should be subject to her father, and after that to her husband, and later on to her son.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Can you please summarize, because instead of talking of the ancient and the history,
Yes,
talk
sir.
of the present, so that because we have time constraints.
Alright, ma'am, I'm just concluding.
Please.
Just 2 minutes more. Alright, when we talk about the Western Code of Hammurabi, it denies any independent status to women, whereas Hebraic Code also is not very much helping the women if we see about the ancient time. Next slide please. Crime against women. Next. This is data which I have compiled for the acid attacks. Next. This is the effect of rapes and molestation in India on the foreign nationals. 3 government updated travel advice for the women like UK, Canada and France, which have issued the orders that women when travelling to India, firstly they should not travel. And when they are travelling India, they should be very conscious, and everything which they are doing there should be in the notice of the embassies of the following countries. Next slide please. Next. Alright, these are some compilation that every 77 minutes a dowry death is occurred, every 29 minutes a woman is raped, and every 9th minute a woman is somewhere, one case of cruelty committed by either the husband or relative of the victim occurs every 9 minutes. Okay, next slide. Next. Role of the government, these are some some acts which have been passed by the Parliament from independence till date, that is from 1956 to 2013, and there is a chapter 20 IPC which has been specially there just to protect the women. And next slide. Chapter 20 talks about, actually I have compiled this thing that later on if a woman is somewhere harassed, or if a woman wants to know about her rights, then rather than just turning the entire Indian Penal Code, which contains many sections, more than 500 sections, she should just quote this, the chapter 20, which is completely a boon for the Indian women, so from section 493 to section 498, and later on in 498A, the dowry deaths have, and the cruelty has also been mentioned. Next slide please. The 5-year plans in context to women from independence till date I have mentioned. The first 5-year plan, it highlighted the need for the organizing of women to, and later on in the 6th 5-year plan, it stressed the need for greater economic emancipation of women. Secondly, access to the healthcare and family planning services. Next. These are the role of education, like in 86th Amendment Act, there the thing has been mentioned for the right to education under the Act 2009, which represents the consequential legislation envisaged under Article 21A. Okay, next slide. This is the conclusion part. In conclusion part, I would just like to mention one thing. The various crimes which have been committed against the women show that when we talk about development even after the independence, that we see that actually the development is still creeping. We can talk about the big urbanization, industrialization, internationalization, but when we talk about common women in India, we see that there is a lot of things which needs to be improved, and the 4 measures by which it could be, just hold the slide here, the different measures which can be implemented are like education, which has already been implemented by the initiation of Article 21A in the Constitution. Apart from that, we have the political empowerment, we have financial empowerment. The first thing, the biggest empowerment is that when a woman starts empowering the other women. Few days back I was watching an interview of Mrs. Sushma Swaraj, and she was asked a very small question. She's a great speaker, but actually she was unable to answer the question. The question which was asked to her was, you have broken all the glass ceilings when you entered into your party, but why isn't there another Sushma Swaraj in BJP? Actually, she was not able to answer it properly. So this shows that if a woman is not able to empower the other women, then definitely we are lacking there. So this is the conclusion. Okay, move. All right, move fast. Yeah, these are the references. Thank you.